Have you ever loved someone so deeply, only to find out it was all a lie? Imagine walking into your own bedroom, pregnant, vulnerable, only to see your husband, the man you trusted with your life, tangled in bed with another woman. What would you do in that moment? Would you scream, collapse, walk away? She didn't do any of that. She vanished. No note, no fight, no goodbye. But before she disappeared, she left behind one thing, a single USB drive. And that little piece of plastic, it held the truth. Enough truth to shatter an empire and bury every secret he tried so hard to hide. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about survival. About a woman who knew she was being erased and fought back in the only way she could. So if you think you've heard it all, trust me, you haven't. This story will break your heart and then light a fire in it. She stood in the quiet hallway, her heart pounding louder than thunder. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, revealing the shocking reality. No pregnant wife ever wants to see a silk-sheeted bed occupied by her millionaire husband and an unknown seductive woman. In that single heartbeat, her world collapsed. In that crushing moment, she realized everything she'd built her life upon was a lie. Her breath caught, the weight of betrayal crushing down on her chest. A scream trembled on her lips but never came, only silence. Then, as suddenly as she had appeared, she vanished, gone without a trace, but not without a plan. A single USB drive remained tucked away in a dresser drawer. Its contents were about to unravel the carefully woven tapestry of secrets, lies, and betrayal that threatened to destroy them all. Marcia Linton was a vision of poise and grace in her early 30s, with auburn hair cascading down her shoulders. She carried the glow of pregnancy like a gentle halo. She had grown up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and her humble beginnings never left her heart. Though she was married to Wade Harrington, a man whose fortune stretched across industries from real estate to technology, Marcia retained her genuine warmth and down-to-earth nature. She was not the typical trophy wife many onlookers assumed her to be. Instead, she was the strong, compassionate force behind Wade's success story. Wade Harrington was one of the most recognizable names in business circles. Hailing from an old money family in Charleston, South Carolina, he parlayed his inheritance into bold investments, eventually becoming a self-made billionaire in his own right. The tabloids called him the Golden Harrington, for everything he touched seemed to turn to gold. He was known for his philanthropic gestures, establishing foundations, sponsoring scholarships, and hosting charity galas with celebrities and politicians. Yet behind closed doors, those who truly knew Wade whispered about his icy ambition and penchant for manipulation. When Wade and Marcia married, they appeared to be the perfect power couple. Charitable, refined, well-connected, and utterly in love. But beneath the surface, cracks were slowly starting to form. Marcia often felt Wade's philanthropic persona was more about appearances and less about genuine altruism. In private, he seemed distant, often holed up in his study, taking hushed phone calls late into the night. Their home was a grand, sprawling mansion in the quiet hills overlooking Los Angeles. It was a beautiful estate lined with poplar trees and floral gardens, meticulously cared for by an army of staff. They could have been a model family, except for the gnawing sense that Marcia was alone within those luxurious walls. She often wandered the vast halls at night, her hand resting protectively on her growing belly, listening to the silence that echoed louder than words. Her pregnancy was supposed to bring them closer, but in recent months, Wade was more absent than ever. Caught up in endless board meetings, overseas expansions, and rumored liaisons that Marcia had chosen to ignore, praying they were only malicious rumors. Yet one morning, Marcia's world imploded. Returning earlier than expected from a short trip to San Francisco, where she'd gone to finalize some charitable event details, she stepped into the hush of her own bedroom. On the lavish bed of burgundy silk she once shared with Wade was a sight that would forever change her life. Wade, entwined with a mysterious, raven-haired woman who wore nothing but a smug, knowing smile. The woman appeared comfortable, as though it wasn't her first time there. Marcia's breath caught painfully in her throat. Her entire body locked as her eyes tried to reject what they saw. She wanted to scream, but no sound came. Her soul shattered in that instant, pierced by a betrayal so sharp she felt like she might collapse. The woman's eyes flicked toward her, amused and unbothered. But Wade did not even stir. until Marcia let out a strangled cry. He jolted awake, struggling to hide his shock beneath a veneer of control. But Marcia did not wait around for explanations or excuses. She fled from the room, tears of rage and heartbreak blurring her vision. Her entire world, built on illusions of loyalty and faith, had just been demolished. That very day, Marcia vanished. She left behind no tearful goodbyes, no confrontation, no drawn-out battle. Only silence. Cold, resolute silence. No one could predict the vortex of revelations that was about to consume everyone around her. Unbeknownst to Wade, the final parting gift Marcia left behind, a small USB drive in her bedside drawer, would soon become the key to toppling his empire. Detective Sofia Rodriguez was determined, sharp, and relentless. She'd grown up in a rough neighborhood of Los Angeles, clawing her way through countless odds until she joined the LAPD. From day one on the force, she proved herself to be unusually perceptive, noticing details that everyone else missed. If there was a missing person, a suspicious disappearance, or a complicated web of secrets, Sofia was the detective who could unravel it. When the Harrington Mansion staff reported Marcia's disappearance to the authorities, 3 days after she vanished, to be exact, Sofia was assigned the case. There had been no ransom note, no signs of forced entry or violence. Marcia's room, while obviously left in haste, did not indicate a struggle. Clothes were missing from her walk-in closet, and a few personal items, such as her favorite silver wristwatch and a framed photo of her family, were gone too. It looked like she had packed and left on her own terms. But why would a pregnant woman simply vanish from a life of such privilege? On her first visit to the Harrington Mansion, Detective Rodriguez found the staff polite but tight-lipped. They claimed to know nothing. Just that Miss Harrington came home, seemed distressed, and then the next morning she was gone. Wade Harrington himself was strangely composed, speaking to Sofia in clipped, measured tones. He said he had no idea why Marcia left, nor did he know where she might have gone. He insisted there had been no major argument. Rather, she had simply become emotional and run out. An unfortunate family misunderstanding, he suggested. But the words felt too tidy, too rehearsed. Sofia's instincts prickled like a warning. Something about Wade's demeanor, his carefully schooled expression, his deliberate wording, told her he was hiding far more than he was letting on. Sofia shifted slightly in her seat, her eyes narrowing as she observed Wade more intently. Her years on the force had taught her to read between the lines, to sense the emotional currents that often betrayed the truth behind polished facades. And Wade's facade was too perfect. Every movement calculated, every syllable measured. There was no grief, no confusion, just cold efficiency. She asked him about the rumors swirling around town. Rumor was that Wade had been spotted with a young woman at upscale restaurants and private clubs. He brushed aside the gossip with a practiced laugh. He was a public figure, he said, and paparazzi were known for spinning fantasies to sell more tabloids. But to Sofia, the laugh didn't reach his eyes. His calmness wasn't confidence, it was control. Despite Wade's cool dismissal, Sofia's gut told her that Marcia's disappearance was not a simple case of a pregnant wife running off. The Harrington security team claimed that the house cameras were under maintenance the very night she vanished. A curious coincidence. Far too neat for the detective's liking. It was as if every potential trail had been swept clean just moments before her arrival, like someone had gone through with a surgical precision to ensure nothing remained. That kind of preparation didn't happen by chance. It reeked of intent. Nonetheless, she had no proof of wrongdoing. All she had was a growing suspicion that she had stepped onto a precarious tightrope, suspended above an abyss of secrets that might swallow her whole. If she wasn't careful, then a seemingly insignificant detail caught Sofia's attention. While examining Marcia's belongings, Sofia noticed a small note, scrawled on a post-it stuck to the bottom of Marcia's dresser drawer. It read, USB insurance. It was so short and cryptic that it almost seemed meaningless, except that it was hidden out of sight. Sofia's pulse quickened. This wasn't a random memo. This was left on purpose, a clue, a warning, or both. Sofia asked the staff if they'd found any USB drives. Everyone claimed ignorance. Even after a careful search of the room by the forensics team, no USB had been discovered. But someone was lying, and Sofia could feel it, like static in the air before a storm. She felt certain that if she could find that missing USB, she'd be one step closer to the truth. And though she wasn't sure what kind of insurance Marcia might have stored on it, her instincts screamed that it would be explosive. Unbeknownst to Detective Rodriguez, the mysterious, raven-haired woman had a name: Serena Montclair. She was a figure well known in elite social circles, though not always for admirable reasons. Growing up in a modest home in Sacramento, Serena had clawed her way into LA's high society scene, leveraging her stunning looks and uncanny ability to charm powerful men. Rumor had it that she'd been a companion for wealthy businessmen, providing more than just eye candy at high-stakes events. Her association with Wade Harrington began innocently enough, or so she liked to claim. They met at a charity fundraiser for orphans in Kenya. Wade had been there as the philanthropic host, and Serena as a friend of a board member. Sparks flew from the moment they locked eyes. For Wade, it was a diversion, an exhilarating escape from what he perceived as the monotony of a stable marriage and the impending responsibilities of fatherhood. For Serena, it was like landing the golden goose, the elusive billionaire who could finally elevate her to the pinnacle of wealth and prestige. The affair turned serious quicker than either of them expected. Late-night trysts in luxury hotel suites became clandestine getaways on private yachts. The thrill was intoxicating. Exclusive resorts, whispered laughter under the cover of darkness, champagne that never seemed to stop flowing. Serena wore luxury like second skin, and with Wade by her side, she felt invincible, as if the world had finally opened its gates to a life she'd only dreamed of. Serena enjoyed the heady feeling of power, knowing she could sway a man as controlling as Wade to her desires. Over time, she convinced herself she had genuine feelings for him. But even as she whispered words of affection, a part of her kept calculating, measuring every moment for what it could gain her. Whether those feelings were for Wade as a person or Wade as a golden ticket was an open question. For Wade, Serena was a guilty pleasure. He rationalized it in his mind. He deserved some excitement after working so hard to build his empire. He had convinced himself that Marcia would never know. But that illusion was shattered the day Marcia walked in on them. The moment he saw his wife's devastated face, he felt a pang of regret. Brief, but intense. Like a man watching the one thing he couldn't afford to lose slip through his fingers. Her eyes had held no words, only heartbreak, disbelief, and a piercing silence that screamed louder than anything she could have said. In that instant, Wade understood the gravity of his betrayal, but the realization came too late. Still, in the aftermath, Wade's immediate concern was how to contain the damage. He had never expected Marcia to vanish without a word, and it unnerved him how swiftly she'd acted. In the days following Marcia's disappearance, Serena tried to make herself indispensable. She offered comfort, hoping that she would stand by Wade through whatever storms lay ahead. She played the role of the loyal companion, the soothing presence, but behind her soft words was a growing dread. She also feared that their affair would become public knowledge, and that it might tarnish Wade's reputation and, by extension, her access to his fortune. She had seen powerful men cast aside mistresses when things got too risky. She couldn't allow that to happen. Losing Wade now wouldn't just break her heart. It would unravel everything she'd worked for. Each time Wade seemed distracted or distant, her chest tightened. She couldn't tell if it was love or survival instinct, but she knew one thing. If she lost her grip now, she'd lose everything. One evening, as Serena was sipping wine on the Harrington Mansion's terrace, Wade revealed his biggest fear, that Marcia had some kind of evidence of his financial manipulations over the years. He had engaged in borderline illegal practices, maybe worse. And Marcia, being deeply involved in the philanthropic side of his empire, would have had access to documents that implicated him. If she was seeking revenge, she might bring it all crashing down. His voice trembled for the first time. And in that moment, Serena saw something she'd never seen in him before. Fear. Real, paralyzing fear. The kind that could make a man desperate. Serena asked if that included any evidence that could incriminate her as well. Wade paused, swirling the wine in his glass, and gave a small nod. He confessed there had been some money laundering under the guise of charitable donations. Some accounts had been set up in Serena's name to move funds around discreetly. If Marcia had uncovered those, it could mean jail time for both of them. A chill ran down Serena's spine. For all her calculated ambition and carefully curated charm, she had never truly considered what prison would feel like, what it would smell like, sound like, how it would strip away every ounce of control she had so carefully built. Serena's stomach dropped. Her grip tightened on the wine glass, knuckles turning white. For the first time, the reality of her situation came crashing in. Not just scandal, but prison. She felt the walls closing in. All the glamour, the whispered promises, the life of ease she'd clawed her way into, it could all collapse in an instant. And worse, she wouldn't just fall alone. Wade's empire might crumble, but she'd be buried under the debris. That night, Serena resolved to do whatever it took to find Marcia, and that USB, if it existed, and make certain it never saw the light of day. Marcia had gone off the grid with calculated precision. Her departure wasn't a spur-of-the-moment escape. It was a meticulously planned exit strategy she had prepared for months, once her suspicions about Wade's infidelity and financial deceit began to solidify. She hadn't initially wanted to believe that her husband could betray her so completely. But the signs were there. Clandestine meetings, strange phone calls, suspicious transactions in the foundation's accounts. She had lain awake countless nights, wrestling with denial, wondering if she was being paranoid or perceptive. But the patterns didn't lie. The disconnection in Wade's eyes, the sudden changes in financial protocols, the unfamiliar scent lingering on his shirts, it all added up. And eventually, so did her resolve. Now, several days after vanishing, she found herself in a small, unassuming cottage on the outskirts of Santa Fe, New Mexico. A longtime friend, Peter Johnson, an ex-accountant turned tech forensics specialist, had helped her set up a safe haven. Peter was one of the few people Marcia trusted implicitly. She had grown up with Peter back in Tulsa. They were childhood neighbors, practically family. He had seen her through the toughest times of her youth. When everyone else drifted away, Peter stayed. She had trusted him enough to let him in on her suspicions about Wade's illicit dealings. It was Peter who had advised her to gather digital evidence and store it securely, just in case she ever needed insurance. And so, over the past year, Marcia had collected thousands of documents, everything from suspicious wire transfers to suspiciously inflated invoices for the Harrington Foundation's projects. On that single USB drive, she had compiled everything: banking records, email exchanges, internal memos, even hush-money payoffs to local officials that Wade had orchestrated under the table. If brought to light, the evidence would not just ruin Wade's reputation, it would pave the way for criminal charges. But at night, when the lights dimmed and silence crept in, the weight of it crushed her chest. Was she becoming the enemy of the man she once loved? Or had he become the enemy long before she noticed? There were no easy answers, only the gnawing ache of betrayal and the cold grip of truth. But that knowledge didn't comfort her. It crushed her. Marcia struggled with the guilt of what she was doing. She loved Wade, or at least the version of him she had once known. The man who whispered promises under candlelight. The man who once held her hand like it was the most precious thing in the world. But that man had changed into someone unrecognizable, someone who would lie, cheat, and possibly harm innocent people for the sake of more power and money. When she saw him in bed with Serena Montclair, it was like a final straw. No more questions, no more waiting. That moment didn't just break her, it freed her. All illusions were shattered, and she realized there was no going back. At the cottage, Peter reassured Marcia that her plan was sound. The USB left behind was a trap. It contained enough evidence to devastate Wade's empire, but it also had a hidden encryption layer that would give Marcia time to negotiate, should he try to get rid of her or their unborn child. If Wade tried to tamper with or destroy the files, the data would auto-upload to multiple news outlets and authorities. It was Marcia's ace in the hole, her last stand against a powerful man who thought he could buy anything, even the silence of those he'd wronged. Each night, Marcia lay awake listening to the wind outside the cottage, her hand on her belly, wondering what kind of world she was bringing a child into. She wrestled with fear, heartbreak, and a twinge of hope. Hope that by exposing Wade's criminal activities, she might free herself from the nightmares that haunted her. That maybe, in some twisted sense, her child would grow up in a safer reality, one not tainted by corruption and deceit. Peter tried to comfort her, reminding her that this was the only way forward. She knew he was right, but it didn't stop the tears from flowing whenever she recalled the moment she saw Wade's mistress lying smugly on their bed. The betrayal still echoed in her bones. But she would not be broken. Quietly, resolutely, she prepared for the next steps. She knew that the storm she was unleashing would be destructive, possibly even life-threatening for her. Yet she clung to the belief that truth and justice, however messy they might be, were worth fighting for. Detective Sofia Rodriguez found herself increasingly restless. Days of fruitless inquiries, sifting through leads, and running into dead ends had tested her patience. The entire city was abuzz with the story of the pregnant wife of the millionaire mogul who'd gone missing. The media leaped at every chance to sensationalize the scandal, but the police had yet to make any real progress. Every headline felt like a personal failure. Sofia felt the invisible pressure to solve this case quickly. Marcia's mysterious disappearance haunted her dreams. At night, there was something heartbreakingly vulnerable about a pregnant woman vanishing without a trace. Determined to pursue a fresh angle, Sofia decided to visit a contact of hers, a savvy investigative journalist named Margaret Holt, who worked at the Los Angeles Tribune. Margaret was known for her unyielding drive to expose corruption, and she often had sources in high places who whispered secrets the public was never meant to hear. If something lurked beneath the gilded Harrington empire, Margaret might have caught wind of it. They met in a small cafe on a quiet street downtown. Margaret arrived in her usual worn-out jeans and sharp blazer, her hair in a casual bun, a notebook and pen always at the ready. She walked like someone who knew too much and trusted too little. After exchanging brief pleasantries, Sofia laid out what she had: rumors of Wade's affair, security footage that mysteriously went missing, and a potential mention of a USB in Marcia's personal effects. Margaret listened intently, her eyes narrowing with interest. Then Margaret revealed something that caused Sofia's spine to tingle. She had been working on a story for months about high-profile philanthropists who might be involved in money laundering schemes. Several anonymous sources had pointed to Wade Harrington's foundation as one of the biggest laundering vehicles in California. Margaret had been trying to gather solid proof, but had run into dead ends. She suspected Wade had powerful friends in government and finance who were helping cover his tracks. The cafe noise seemed to fade into a blur around Sofia as the pieces of the puzzle rearranged themselves in her mind. Her heartbeat picked up, thudding in her ears. Suddenly, this wasn't just about a missing woman, it was about corruption that touched the highest rungs of influence. Sofia leaned back slowly, the weight of the revelation settling heavily on her shoulders. This was no longer just a missing persons case. It was something much bigger. If Marcia had proof of Wade's illicit dealings, that could be motive enough for someone to silence her forever. And the more Sofia considered it, the more the theory refused to feel like just a theory. It felt like certainty clothed in questions. A pregnant woman doesn't vanish for no reason, especially not a woman like Marcia. She felt a renewed urgency to find Marcia before it was too late. Taking a leap of faith, Sofia decided to trust Margaret with the existence of the post-it note referencing a USB. If there was proof, it had to be in those files. Armed with this lead, Margaret promised to keep digging. She had a handful of trusted contacts within offshore banking networks. Maybe she could find suspicious shell companies tied to Harrington. She would share anything she uncovered. Sofia saw a spark in Margaret's eyes, part adrenaline, part fury. She wasn't just chasing a story. She was chasing justice. But it was clear she knew the risk. The fire in Margaret's gaze mirrored something in Sofia, an unspoken resolve to walk straight into danger if that's what it took. It made Sofia feel less alone in the storm she was navigating. Exiting the cafe, Detective Rodriguez felt both energized and wary. If Wade truly was at the center of a massive laundering operation, then anyone connected to him, mistresses, employees, even law enforcement officials, might be in danger if they knew too much. She worried not only for Marcia, but also for herself and Margaret. Powerful men don't simply let incriminating evidence come to light without a fight, and this one had the reach of an empire. That night, as Sophia stared at her whiteboard, plastered with pictures and notes on the Harrington case, she couldn't shake a sinking feeling. Where was Marcia, and was she safe? Would the pregnant woman ever return on her own, or had she fled permanently, convinced that her life was in peril? The only thing Sophia was certain of, the deeper she dug, the more dangerous the ground beneath her feet became. The darker this case became, Wade Harrington sat in his private study, the air thick with tension. He was reviewing documents on his laptop, spreadsheets of the family foundation's finances. The numbers looked perfect on paper. Everything was meticulously laundered to appear legitimate, tied to philanthropic endeavors, grants, and charitable funds. But Wade's anxious mind danced from scenario to scenario of what might happen if Marcia used the alleged evidence she had undoubtedly collected. He remembered the first time he slipped into the world of illicit finance. In the beginning, it was just small manipulations, transferring money from one shell company to another under the guise of foundation expenses. His father's old money provided a certain shield, and his own cunning did the rest. Each new success emboldened him, and before long he was funneling millions through carefully constructed pipelines that fed back into private investments and personal slush funds. It was thrilling then. A private empire built not just on wealth, but on control, power, secrecy, and now all of it trembled at the edge of exposure. If even a fraction of his misdeeds were exposed, it wouldn't just ruin him. It would leave him rotting in prison. Serena Montclair entered the study without knocking, her face drawn. She looked nothing like the sultry siren Marcia had discovered in bed. Now, shadows under her eyes revealed nights of missed sleep. She had believed that hooking her star to Wade Harrington would guarantee a life of comfort and excitement, never imagining she might become collateral damage in an empire built on deception. "Any word?" she asked, voice hushed. Wade shook his head, eyes still on the screen. "No, my investigators can't find Marcia anywhere." "She either had help," he said, pausing, "or she's smarter than we ever gave her credit for." He met Serena's worried gaze. "But we will find her." Serena swallowed, her mind returning to the dreaded possibility of prison. "What if we can't find her in time?" she asked, fear creeping into her tone. "What if she's already handed the evidence to the authorities?" Wade's expression hardened. "Then we'll make sure it never sees the light of day." His voice was low, steely, the kind that left no room for mercy. "I have powerful friends, Serena. Friends who have just as much at stake as I do. We won't go down without a fight." Despite his reassuring words, tension simmered in the air. Both knew that if the web of illicit deals was exposed, it was game over. Wade had begun pulling every string he could. He'd reached out to Senator David Johnson, an old family friend who owed him political favors. He had also enlisted the services of a private security firm, rumored to employ ex-military personnel capable of finding and silencing any problem. It was no longer about damage control. It was about survival. If Marcia didn't come to her senses in return, they would track her down by force. Sensing how dangerous the situation had become, Serena decided to approach Wade with a new idea. She suggested a carefully orchestrated media spin, painting Marcia as an emotionally unstable woman who had disappeared under suspicious circumstances. The strategy was simple. Discredit Marcia in the public eye so that if she eventually surfaced with accusations, it would be easier to label her claims as the ravings of a traumatized, unstable wife. Wade agreed, though a flicker of guilt crossed his mind at tarnishing the mother of his unborn child. It twisted in his chest, a brief ache he quickly buried. He told himself it was temporary, that it would all be justified once the storm blew over. But even as he pushed the guilt aside, a shadow of doubt lingered, a voice he refused to hear, whispering about lines crossed and a conscience cracked beyond repair. That guilt, however, was fleeting. Survival became the priority. If destroying Marcia's reputation was necessary, then so be it. Wade rationalized his choices. She had brought it upon herself by stealing from him, by threatening his empire, and, his mind added bitterly, by leaving him when he needed her most. At the small cottage in Santa Fe, Marcia was growing restless. She spent her days combing through additional digital files, ensuring everything was backed up securely. Peter Johnson had set up multiple off-site backups, each rigged to release the information if Marcia didn't reset a timer every 24 hours. It was a nerve-wracking system, but it was the only way to guarantee her safety. Should anything happen to her, the files would go public automatically. That, in theory, kept Wade and his associates from striking too hastily. Her pregnancy made the situation far more emotionally turbulent. She felt the baby's gentle kicks in her belly, a constant reminder that she was not just fighting for herself. Each flutter was a small heartbeat of courage, but also a pulse of rising dread. The weight of responsibility sometimes felt unbearable. She would wake in the middle of the night, heart racing, her hand instinctively resting over her stomach, whispering promises to the life growing inside her, promises of protection, of truth, of a world better than the one they were running from. She walked the property's garden paths each evening, seeking solace in the rustle of leaves and the warm glow of the desert sunset. Yet she couldn't completely shake off the fear that, at any moment, Wade's men could burst through the door. One afternoon, while Peter was out gathering supplies, Marcia decided to check the news. She rarely did so, trying to remain hidden, but curiosity got the best of her. She sat at the old wooden table, laptop open, scanning headlines. Her heart nearly stopped when she saw the latest developments. Billionaire philanthropist Wade Harrington appeals for the safe return of missing wife. Rumors of emotional breakdown circulate. Marcia read in disbelief as Wade pleaded on national television, describing his wife as fragile, hinting that she might be mentally unstable due to stress and hormonal issues from her pregnancy. He never said the word crazy, but the insinuation was clear. Her breath caught in her throat. The bile of betrayal rose fast and sharp. To the world, she was no longer Marcia Harrington, philanthropist, mother-to-be, woman of quiet strength. She was now a headline, a cautionary tale, a fragile woman lost to her own mind. The betrayal cut deeper than she thought possible. It wasn't just a lie, it was character assassination in front of millions. From the man she had once loved. His performance was polished, a loving husband, desperate to bring home a confused, possibly delusional wife. Marcia stared at the screen, numb. She had prepared for danger, for betrayal, for threats, but not for this. To be erased, rewritten, rebranded as a broken woman. He insinuated that she had stolen important documents from the foundation in her confused state and needed medical help. The journalists interviewed him sympathetically, barely probing the inconsistencies in his story. She gripped the edge of the table, her emotions vacillating between fury and heartbreak. How dare he weaponize her pregnancy, twist her vulnerability into madness just to cover up his crimes? Tears of outrage blurred her vision. She wasn't just angry, she was betrayed on a level that pierced to her core. That the man who once held her face in his hands and promised to protect her now stood on national television, turning the world against her. It wasn't just self-preservation. It was a calculated erasure of who she truly was. She realized that if Wade succeeded in shaping public perception, any attempt she made to expose him could be dismissed as the ramblings of a woman in crisis. An urgent resolve flooded Marcia's veins. She had to outsmart Wade. That meant getting her story out, on her own terms, to the right people who could verify the evidence before it could be dismissed. She considered contacting Detective Sofia Rodriguez, but fear held her back. Sofia's reputation was solid, but was she fully trustworthy? Wade had connections in the police force, no doubt. Still, Sofia's face on the news updates looked genuinely concerned, not like a puppet on Wade's strings. Marcia stared at the detective's image on her screen, replaying the news clips over and over. In her eyes, she saw worry, not calculation. But then again, trust was a weapon she'd seen used against her too many times. Marcia wanted to believe in her. But trust had become a currency she no longer spent easily. Peter returned later that night to find Marcia pacing anxiously. She told him about Wade's media appearance. Peter was calm, methodical. He suggested they move locations soon, anticipating that Wade's hired men might trace their online footprint. But he also reminded Marcia that if they kept running, they could be on the defensive forever. It might be time to strike back. Share the truth and the evidence directly with journalists or law enforcement beyond Wade's reach. So they hatched a plan. Using secure communication channels, they would approach Margaret Halt at the Los Angeles Tribune, someone known for her commitment to exposing corruption. They would share a taste of the evidence, just enough to prove its authenticity. and see if Margaret would be willing to help orchestrate a massive, indisputable exposé. For the first time in days, Marcia felt something stir deep inside her. Hope. Not just for justice, but for survival on her own terms. She wasn't just a pregnant woman in hiding. She was a whistleblower, a survivor, and maybe, just maybe, the key to taking down an empire built on lies. Under the cover of night, Detective Sofia Rodriguez drove through the winding streets of downtown Los Angeles toward the offices of the Los Angeles Tribune. The clock on her dashboard read nearly midnight, but every block she passed seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Late-night revelers spilled out of trendy bars, neon signs flickered over narrow alleyways, and the soft hum of cars meandered through the city that never truly slept. The Tribune building stood tall among the shorter structures around it, its large windows illuminated by office lights that refused to quit. A beacon in the city's darkness. It was here that Margaret Halt, the relentless investigative journalist, had called Sofia mere hours earlier, urging her to come after the newsroom had quieted down. Something about Margaret's tone on the phone, a mix of breathless excitement and subdued caution, told Sofia that this meeting was not just important. It was a turning point. It could very well be the turning point in the entire Harrington case. Sofia found a parking spot near a side entrance. Even at this late hour, a security guard was stationed at the front desk in the dimly lit lobby. Recognizing Sofia from previous visits, he gave her a brisk nod and waved her inside. She bypassed the silent corridors plastered with framed front pages, each marking a major investigative triumph in the Tribune's storied history. Finally, she reached Margaret's small corner office, where a single light shone through frosted glass. Margaret Halt was hunched over her cluttered wooden desk, typing furiously on a laptop with several documents scattered around her. Sofia could see pages of bank statements, transcripts of cryptic emails, and printouts of suspicious wire transfers. Margaret looked up when Sofia entered and rushed to shut the door behind her, as if expecting eavesdroppers. "You came fast," Margaret said, pushing her glasses up the bridge of her nose. Her hair was piled atop her head in a messy bun, and dark circles rimmed her eyes, the unmistakable imprint of a journalist running on adrenaline and caffeine. "I'm sorry for calling you so late, but once I received these documents, I knew time was of the essence." Sofia slipped out of her light jacket, took a seat opposite Margaret, and leaned forward. "What exactly do you have?" Margaret exhaled, pushing a stack of printouts towards Sofia. "An anonymous tip arrived in my inbox this evening. I'm almost certain it's from Marcia Linton, or someone intimately connected to her." Sofia's breath caught for half a second. If it really was from Marcia, then she wasn't just alive. She was fighting back. The tip includes spreadsheets detailing wire transfers from the Harrington Foundation's accounts to offshore shell companies. There are also references to hush money payments to local officials, and repeated mentions of SM, which I'm reading as Serena Montclair, in multiple bank receipts. The detective felt her pulse quicken. So this is it. Direct evidence of a money laundering operation involving Harrington and Serena. She rifled through the papers, eyes scanning the incriminating numbers. "How are we certain these aren't forgeries?" Margaret tapped her fingers on the edge of a manila folder. "I cross-referenced the data with some partial leads, things I've been chasing for months but couldn't pin down. This matches too closely to be coincidence." I'd been working on a separate investigation into philanthropic fraud. The numbers match patterns I already suspected. This is either the most elaborate hoax I've ever seen, or it's genuine. And my gut says it's genuine. Sofia nodded, her jaw clenching. Her mind flashed with the faces of victims she'd seen over the years. People ruined by greed and hidden corruption. But this felt bigger, more insidious. It wasn't just a personal vendetta. It was a rot infecting the system at its highest levels. The weight of the case pressed down on her shoulders like a storm front closing in. If these documents were real, Wade Harrington was orchestrating one of the biggest financial crimes in recent California history. "Have you shown this to anyone else?" "No one," Margaret replied. "I don't want to risk scaring Wade into hiding or shutting down his accounts before we can fully verify everything. But I also didn't want to sit on it." I trust you, Sophia. You're the only detective I know who won't be swayed by Harrington's money or influence. Sophia felt a flicker of something rare, a strange mixture of honor and burden. Trust was a heavy gift, especially when it came laced with this much danger. Sophia's chest tightened at the enormity of it all. This could mean a high-profile takedown, possibly implicating influential figures in politics and finance. She also thought of Marcia, heavily pregnant, on the run, and likely terrified. If these files had come from her, she wasn't just blowing a whistle. She was stepping into the lion's den, armed with truth and nowhere to hide. How do we proceed? Sophia asked, looking at Margaret with a steady, determined gaze. That's where we need a game plan, Margaret replied, leaning back in her chair. These documents suggest a massive criminal conspiracy. I have contacts in the FBI who specialize in white-collar crime, but if I hand this over to them too soon, we lose control of the story. She paused, tapping the edge of her pen nervously. Plus, they'll first need a formal statement from Marcia or someone who can confirm the data's authenticity. We also have to consider the safety of our source. She's pregnant. And from what you've told me, Harrington's goons will stop at nothing to find her. Sophia glanced down at the stack of documents again, her fingertips brushing across the printed lines like they were explosives wired to detonate. This wasn't just about catching a criminal. It was about protecting the only person brave enough to expose him. Sophia flipped another page, scanning an email exchange that hinted at bribes to local officials in return for development permits. Her hands curled into fists. It wasn't just greed, it was betrayal at the highest levels. Wade must never suspect how much we know until we have enough to lock him down. If he realizes the feds are onto him, he might disappear. Margaret pressed her fingertips together. Exactly. We need proof from Marcia herself. An affidavit, or at least some form of statement. The tip included a note. This is only a fraction. More to come if you're willing to expose the truth. I suspect Marcia wants assurance that this won't just get swept under the rug. She wants the public to know what Wade is capable of. Sophia chewed the inside of her cheek, contemplating the risks. A quiet unease crept up her spine. This wasn't just about evidence anymore. This was about timing, trust, and danger. Every move felt like it could be her last free decision before things spiraled out of control. Then, as if on cue, her phone buzzed in her pocket. The detective pulled it out, eyes narrowing at the unknown number. The text read, "If you want the truth, we can talk tomorrow, 2 p.m. The Old Redwood Diner, outskirts of Glendale. Come alone." A surge of adrenaline coursed through her veins. She turned the phone toward Margaret. "This could be Marcia," she said. "It could also be a trap." Margaret looked at the message, her brow furrowing. "It's the biggest lead we have, but going alone is risky. Do you trust it?" "I'm not sure," Sophia admitted. "Wade's people might have intercepted Marcia's communications. This could be a ruse to lure me in." She took a deep breath. She could feel her pulse in her throat, the thrum of her heart echoing the growing weight of the decision. "But I can't ignore it. If she's reaching out, it means she's still trying to fight. And if she's in danger, I have to show up." Margaret leaned forward, her voice solemn. "You need backup, Sophia. People you trust, who can remain invisible until they're needed." Sophia nodded. "I can't roll up with an entire police unit. That'll scare her off if it's really Marcia. I'll bring a few friends from the force who I know are clean. We'll keep them outside, discreetly. If anything goes sideways, they'll move in." A silence settled between them as the gravity of the next step weighed on both women. In that stillness, Sophia felt the full magnitude of what lay ahead. This wasn't just a meeting. It was the first step onto a battlefield where words, truths, and lies were the weapons. Margaret turned her gaze to the clock on the wall, which read nearly 1 in the morning. "Promise me you'll be careful. If Harrington has half the resources we suspect, he's dangerous." Sophia replied softly, slipping the documents back into their folder. "I promise. But Marcia's safety is a priority, and if she has the rest of these files, maybe even more damning evidence, then meeting her is worth the risk." Margaret stood up, exhaustion etched into her face, but her eyes still burned with that reporter's tenacity. "After tomorrow, if you manage to talk to Marcia, let me know what you discover. I'll keep digging into Harrington's offshore ties. If we can synchronize our efforts, we might just corner him. Sophia collected her jacket, squared her shoulders, and gave Margaret a small, grateful smile. We will corner him, she said firmly. If Marcia is handing us the puzzle pieces, I intend to fit them together so tightly that Wade Harrington has no place to run. And with that, Detective Sophia Rodriguez stepped out into the late night once more, her thoughts a maelstrom of strategy, anxiety, and a rising tide of hope. The city was quiet, but in her mind, everything screamed of momentum. The next day's rendezvous at the Redwood Diner could be the catalyst that either sealed her fate or brought a powerful man's empire to its knees. The next afternoon, Detective Sophia Rodriguez arrived at the Redwood Diner, a modest joint on an old highway that stretched out of Glendale. Its neon sign flickered against the California sun, and the parking lot was mostly empty. Sophia wore plain clothes, jeans and a leather jacket, hoping to avoid drawing unnecessary attention. She parked her car near the entrance, scanning the perimeter to ensure her backup officers were in place but inconspicuous. Inside, the diner had the nostalgic feel of another era. Checkered floors, red vinyl booths, and an old jukebox in the corner. Sophia ordered a coffee and sat at a corner booth, eyes scanning the entrance. After a few nerve-wracking minutes, a woman slid into the seat across from her. She wore dark sunglasses, a scarf wrapped around her head, and a loose coat. But there was no hiding the slight curve of her belly or the lines of worry etched on her face. "Marcia?" Sophia asked quietly, her heart pounding. The woman nodded and removed her sunglasses. Dark shadows under her eyes betrayed her exhaustion, but there was a quiet strength in her gaze. A survivor's gaze, steeled by betrayal and driven by truth. "Detective Rodriguez," she whispered, "I don't have much time." Sophia's mind whirled. This was it. The ghost of the Harrington mansion. The woman everyone was hunting, now sitting right in front of her. "Everyone's looking for you," she said gently. "Are you safe?" Marcia glanced around anxiously. "For now, but Wade's men are searching for me. I can't stay in one place too long. I came because I need your help. I'm ready to expose everything Wade has done, but I need assurances that I won't just be handed over to him, or worse, become the victim of some cover-up." Sophia's voice was calm but earnest. "I can't guarantee everything, but I can promise you that I take justice seriously. I've been trying to piece together the truth behind your disappearance, and I believe your story. The documents you sent to Margaret Holt are damning." Marcia's eyes flickered with relief for a moment. That small moment of connection between them, truth meeting belief, was the most peace she'd felt in weeks. "That's just the tip of the iceberg. I have more. Dozens of encrypted files that link Wade to powerful officials, a network of offshore accounts, and even bribery across multiple states." "Are you willing to testify?" Sophia asked. Marcia hesitated. Her hand instinctively drifted to her belly, as if shielding the unborn child from the very idea of danger. "Testify, yes, but I need protection. Witness protection if possible, and not just for me, for my unborn child." Sophia reached across the table, resting her hand gently atop Marcia's. "You've been through hell. I understand. I'll do everything in my power to ensure that happens, but we need to move quickly. Wade has influence, and if we don't secure official channels, he can bury this." Marcia nodded, her voice quivering. "There's more. Serena Montclair, she's not just a mistress. She's complicit in hiding funds. If I'm going to testify, I want her involvement exposed. She's been feeding Wade's ego, helping him launder money for her own gain." Before Sophia could respond, the diner's door swung open with a jingle of bells. A tall man in a dark suit stepped in, scanning the booths, his gaze locked on them. Marcia tensed, her knuckles turning white against the table. The man started walking toward them with deliberate, menacing strides. "Stay calm," Sophia whispered, sliding her hand toward her concealed firearm. She discreetly tapped the phone in her pocket, sending a preset alert to her backup. The tension in the air was palpable. The diner's hum of quiet conversation faded into white noise. Time seemed to contract, like the breath before a storm. If this man was one of Wade's henchmen, the carefully laid meeting could erupt into violence. Marcia gripped Sophia's hand. "Please," she breathed, "don't let them take me." There was desperation in her voice. A soft, trembling plea that cut through the chaos like a knife. The fear in her eyes wasn't just about herself. It was the fear of losing the life growing inside her. Sophia nodded, adrenaline spiking as she prepared to confront whatever threat stepped up to their table. The tall man reached their booth and loomed over them. For a split second, time seemed to slow. Sophia was ready to draw her weapon, but then she noticed a flicker of recognition in Marcia's eyes. Marcia exhaled, half in relief, half in confusion. "Peter," she whispered. "Peter Johnson." He was wearing a somber expression, clearly strained by fear for Marcia's safety. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, looking at Sophia with guarded eyes. "I had to make sure it was safe here before I brought more documents. We don't have much time. Wade's men are close." Sophia let out a silent breath, relaxing only slightly. "You nearly gave us a heart attack," she scolded him, keeping her voice low. Peter slid into the booth next to Marcia. "I heard chatter that Wade hired a private security firm to track us. They've been monitoring phone signals in the area, which is why we had to keep our communication short. We need to move fast. The full set of files is ready for handover." Marcia turned her gaze to Sophia. "I'll give you everything, but you have to promise me you'll take it to the right people. People not in Wade's pocket." Sophia nodded. "I'll deliver them to the FBI's white-collar crime unit. I have a contact there who's clean, a special agent named Patrick Neville. He's taken down bigger fish than Wade, and he doesn't scare easily. But once I make that call, we have to be prepared for a quick escalation. Wade will know something's up. He'll try to discredit you, or worse." Marcia looked down at her belly, a protective hand resting there. Her fingertips lingered for a beat longer, as if drawing strength from the quiet rhythm of life inside her. She had been running, hiding, but this moment, this choice, was no longer just about escape. It was about legacy, about truth, about the world her child would be born into. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her voice was firm. "We're ready to disappear again, if necessary, until the trial. But I have to know, will there be justice?" Sophia's eyes were steely with determination. "It won't be easy, but I believe so." The diner, once nostalgic and safe, now felt like the edge of a battlefield. And Marcia, fragile yet unwavering, sat like a mother lion ready to fight for her cub. But it might get dangerous before we get to that point. Peter slid a thumb drive across the table. "This is the entire trove. There's a passcode, but you'll need Marcia's biometric to unlock the final layer. The instructions are included. Please, detective, don't lose this. It's our only bargaining chip." Sophia pocketed the drive, feeling the weight of responsibility settle into her chest like a stone. It wasn't just data. It was Marcia's life, her baby's future, and the key to toppling a criminal empire. Her fingers brushed the fabric of her jacket as she secured the drive in a hidden pocket, the feel of it against her ribs like the pulse of destiny ticking forward. Every decision from here on could change lives. "I won't let you down. Now let's get you both out of here," quietly. But fate had other plans. The diner's door burst open again, this time admitting two men in casual but coordinated attire, scanning the room with purpose. One locked eyes on Peter. The other's gaze flicked to Marcia. Their intent was clear. Wade's men had found them. Sophia's adrenaline surged. She stood, badge in hand. "LAPD, I suggest you both step outside." Her voice was commanding, sharp as steel, but she saw the look they exchanged. Defiance. They weren't going anywhere. One lunged forward, attempting to grab Marcia's arm. Sophia drew her weapon, her stance wide and ready. Her backup officers outside were likely rushing in, but seconds felt like lifetimes. Peter quickly stepped between Marcia and the brute, trying to keep him from getting close. The look in Peter's eyes was raw, a blend of fear and fierce protectiveness. There was no hesitation, only instinct, driven by loyalty and an unspoken promise. Peter knew what was at stake. Not just evidence, but a life, a future that hadn't even taken its first breath. Chairs clattered, frightened patrons shrieked, scrambling for cover. The second man swung his arm at Sophia, aiming for her gun. She dodged, narrowly avoiding his blow, and brought her elbow crashing into his midsection. She didn't have time to think, only to act. In the chaos, Marcia crouched low, arms wrapped protectively around her stomach. Terror surged through her veins, but she wouldn't scream. Not with her baby inside her. Not when she still had a chance to fight. Each breath was a battle, each heartbeat a vow. Her hands cradled her belly as if her will alone could shield the child growing within. She wasn't running anymore. She was enduring. Peter landed a punch that sent the first man reeling backward. Sophia pinned the second man against the counter, her forearm pressed to his throat, weapon pointed at his torso. Sirens wailed. Sophia's backup team stormed in, guns drawn, barking orders. "LAPD, drop your weapons, hands where we can see them." The two men hesitated, then slowly raised their hands, fury smoldering in their eyes. The tension in the diner broke like a snapped cord, leaving behind shattered glasses, overturned chairs, and stunned silence. Sophia turned to Marcia, breathless. "Time's up. We have to move. Now." Marcia nodded, tears brimming in her eyes, not from fear but from the sudden, overwhelming clarity that she was not alone in this fight. Resolve replaced panic. The walls were closing in, yes, but she was ready to face what came next. The final showdown with Wade Harrington had begun. The final reckoning was about to begin. Through an expedited process, Detective Sofia Rodriguez contacted her FBI liaison, Special Agent Patrick Neville, and laid out the situation in full. Within hours, a confidential meeting was arranged in a secure federal building in downtown Los Angeles. Marcia, still visibly shaken but composed, arrived with Peter by her side. They were ushered through multiple security checkpoints, flanked by armed agents who clearly understood the level of threat facing her. Sophia joined them, the precious thumb drive secured tightly in her jacket pocket. In a sterile, windowless conference room, Marcia came face to face with Agent Neville. He was a broad-shouldered man in his late 40s, carrying himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had stared down corrupt giants before. Thick folders were spread across the table, preliminary evidence compiled from Margaret Holt's partial disclosures. The fluorescent lights above buzzed softly, casting a clinical pallor over the room. But Marcia's expression burned with clarity. She sat straight, her hands folded tightly in front of her, anchoring herself against the tidal wave of nerves. Marcia took a deep breath, then began recounting everything. Her role in assembling the incriminating documents, how she uncovered the laundering pipelines, the bribed officials, and more personally, the heartbreak of discovering Wade's affair and deceit. Each word she spoke was measured, deliberate, a mosaic of trauma and truth. The pain wasn't just in her tone, but in the way she occasionally paused, forcing herself to remain composed, as if revisiting each betrayal in real time. Her voice trembled only once when she spoke of the moment she knew her child's future was at risk. But even then, her resolve never cracked. "Miss Harrington," Neville said gently, "we appreciate your cooperation. If even half of what you're saying is verified, we're looking at one of the largest money laundering and racketeering cases ever pursued against a private individual." Marcia swallowed hard, glancing at Peter, who gave her a small, encouraging nod. "I want full immunity," she said, her voice steady. "And I want witness protection for both of us, and for the safety of my child." Neville turned to Sophia, who nodded in full support. Then he gave Marcia a measured but reassuring look. "Given your role as a whistleblower and the strength of the evidence you're providing, I believe we can secure that. But we'll need a formal statement, and you'll have to testify in court. Are you willing to do that?" Marcia's eyes flickered with determination. "Yes," she said. "I have no choice. Wade has already tried to paint me as unstable. He'll stop at nothing to silence me. This is the only way to stop him." Neville exchanged a meaningful glance with Sophia, who met his eyes with unwavering focus. "We're going to do everything in our power to protect you," he said. "We'll move quickly. Our surveillance indicates Wade Harrington will be attending a high-profile gala tomorrow, a gathering of the city's elite. We plan to coordinate a series of warrants to freeze his accounts, and if all checks out, make an arrest on site." He tapped the thumb drive on the table. "But the chain of custody for these documents must be airtight. Once the hammer drops, Wade will know he's cornered." Marcia reached instinctively for the edge of the table, grounding herself. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears, not from fear, but from the sheer magnitude of what was about to unfold. Marcia felt her heart pound. This was it. No more hiding, no more running. Whatever storm was about to break, she would meet it head-on, not just for herself, but for the child growing inside her, for the truth, and for every silent victim Wade had trampled on his way to the top. She closed her eyes briefly, imagining the father of her child being escorted away in handcuffs. It wasn't just the image of Wade's fall that haunted her. It was the ghost of what they once shared. The late-night conversations, the dreams of raising a family, all now tainted. Despite her anger and betrayal, she felt a faint sense of sorrow. She had once loved Wade deeply. But that love had been built on illusions. Illusions shattered the day she discovered his affair and realized the true depth of his criminal world. Her chest tightened as memories surged. Wade laughing in their kitchen over burnt toast, the way he used to trace circles on her back as she drifted to sleep. She clung to those fragments once, not knowing they were smoke trailing from a hidden fire. Just then, the conference room door opened. Another agent stepped in, placing a tablet before Neville. He took one look and spoke sharply. "We've intercepted communications. Wade's men are frantically searching for Marcia. They know she's in contact with the authorities, though they haven't realized yet it's the FBI." He turned to Marcia. "We need to relocate you. Immediately." Neville's voice was calm but urgent. "Your testimony is vital. After we take you to a secure location, we'll finalize all protective measures. But understand, once we go public with this, there's no turning back." Marcia inhaled slowly, her shoulders straightening with resolve. "I understand," she said softly. "Do it. End this." Within the hour, Marcia and Peter were whisked away in unmarked SUVs to a heavily guarded safe house outside Los Angeles. The vehicle's hum drowned her thoughts, but her hand never left her belly. Each breath she took was a quiet vow that this child would never live under Wade's shadow. That survival would no longer be the only goal. Freedom would be. Marcia clutched her belly the entire ride, feeling each mile bring her closer to a safer world for her child. Sophia stayed behind, finalizing paperwork, coordinating with Margaret Holt, and preparing for the biggest sting operation of her career. She knew this was their only shot. If Wade slipped away, destroyed evidence, or leveraged his connections to flee, he could vanish with his billions into an offshore sanctuary. But if they succeeded, they would dismantle a corrupt empire and free Marcia from the nightmare that had consumed her life for far too long. The next morning, as glittering luxury cars rolled up to the gala, Wade Harrington emerged in a tailored suit, flashing that signature, confident smile to the cameras. He looked untouchable, invincible. Little did he know, hidden among the crowd were federal agents, waiting for their moment. In a dramatic takedown, Wade Harrington and Serena Montclair were placed under arrest. The media captured every second, gasps, cameras flashing, and the unmistakable click of handcuffs echoing through the marble lobby. The downfall of one of society's most revered philanthropists had just begun. Marcia, safe in protective custody, watched it all unfold on a muted television screen. Her tears were not of weakness, but of release. Grief and vindication bled together in each drop, cleansing the fear that had lived in her bones. Tears slid silently down her cheeks, not just for what had been lost, but for what had finally been reclaimed. Her voice, her truth, her power. She would go on to testify, unveiling the full scope of Wade's empire of lies. Justice, at long last, would be served. So the story has ended, dear friends. Are you still here with me? If you've made it this far, then something about Marcia's journey has stirred something deep within your heart. And maybe, just maybe, you see a piece of yourself in her, a part of you that's been silenced, doubted, or betrayed. But you stayed, you listened, you felt every twist, every heartbreak, and every quiet victory. And that means something. This story wasn't just about corruption or a missing woman. It was about courage, about finding your voice when the world tries to shut you down, about standing up even when you're terrified. Marcia's journey reminds us that truth has power, that even when love fails us, when people we trust betray us, we still have something no one can steal. Our will to fight for what's right. Maybe you're facing something right now. A lie, a betrayal, a silence that feels too loud. Let this story be a reminder that even when everything seems lost, there's always a path forward, and it often starts with a single choice, to believe in your voice again. As it says in heterodoxism, the light does not return because we call it. It returns because we refuse to stay in the dark. So here's what I ask of you. If this story moved you, if you felt your heart beat a little harder, your throat tighten with emotion, then don't keep it to yourself. Share this story with someone who needs courage. Hit that like button if you believe in truth, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story that just might change someone's life, even yours, together. And this is just the beginning. See you in the next story.